This is the Crowdcrux Crowdfunding Podcast with Sal Briggman, where we cover everything you need to know to launch a successful crowdfunding campaign. We speak with proven entrepreneurs who've raised money from the crowd and want to teach you how to do the same. Stay tuned because we're about to reveal how to launch your dream project with your host, Sal Briggman.
Before we get started with this podcast episode, I want to take a second to introduce you to my friends at Fulfillrite. If you need help shipping out your Kickstarter or Indiegogo perks or rewards, Fulfillrite is the absolute best company for you. I've been working with them for a while and I can vouch for their services. They make it dead simple and take all of the headache out of shipping out all of those boxes, all of those orders to your backers and your customers. If you want to check them out, go to fulfillrite.com at FULFILLRITE.com.
What up, crowdfunders? Salvador Briggman here. Welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Again, my name is Salvador Briggman. Welcome to this show. Hope you've been having a great week thus far. You've also had a chance to check out some of the other episodes that I put out there. My goal with this entire show is to bring you the right education, to bring you the right strategies, the things that are working right now when it comes to launching a campaign on Indiegogo, on Kickstarter, an equity crowdfunding campaign, whatever it is. I really want to give you the tools, if you will, to have a powerful launch, to have a strong foundation that you're launching off of, so that way you can be more successful. We've heard from many of the people who've actually listened to this show have gone on to run campaigns successfully. So it just goes to show, it's a testament that if you are willing to educate yourself, willing to prepare, and also willing to take action, great things can happen in the future. So recently, one of the things that I have been doing is I've been trying to do more public speaking. So if you don't know, I do this podcast. I also do YouTube. I also have online courses and blog posts. I've been writing a blog since 2012. So I do a lot of education in the online space, but I've been trying to do more public speaking in person. So I've been going out there, I've been sourcing more opportunities. One of the ones recently was I was able to be a moderator on this panel in New York City, and we were all talking about crowdfunding. So we had some of the different experts from different platforms like Indiegogo, Kickstarter, Kiva, etc. And the goal here is to get that information to the people that are just now launching campaigns. So through this panel, I was able to meet Michael, who's one of the staff members at Kickstarter. And I'm just like, wow, that's a really great opportunity because we can actually pick his brain. We can get into certain things like how do you actually rank better on Kickstarter? How do you get into the newsletter? How do you become a project we love? What are some of the ways that you can really accelerate your project? What are their thoughts on service providers in the industry? Like all of these different things, all those questionings that you've been having, that you've been asking me, we can ask him directly. So I'm like, this is a great opportunity. So I just had to have him on the show, and he brought it all. Like he was extremely transparent. He shared also the story of having grown with the company from 30 employees to now over 100 employees. I think they're at like 150 now. So some really cool, interesting stories, but also he gets down to the brass tacks of what do you need to do if you want to launch a successful campaign? How do you actually, get better in terms of ranking better in the Kickstarter marketplace? Things and advice that he has for creators, all of that. So this is a really value-packed episode, and I hope that you enjoy it. The other quick announcement that I have for you before we get into today's podcast is if you want to gain access to my weekly newsletter, a weekly newsletter that I send out, advice, tips, videos, new content I'm putting together, new announcements, new blog posts that I've written. If you want to gain access to that, all you have to do is go to this link that I'm about to mention at crowdcrux.com/subscribe. That is crowdcrux.com/subscribe. You just enter your email and you'll hop onto my weekly newsletter. I only send value-packed emails, try to give you the best education just like I do with this show, so I think that you will like it. But without further ado, let's get into today's podcast episode where we talked with a staff member from Kickstarter. Michael, welcome to the podcast. Been looking forward to talking with you the basics of Kickstarter. I think we had a really great panel last week, 2 weeks ago, talking about crowdfunding. I've been honestly just looking forward to having you on the show because Kickstarter has changed so many lives. Like, it's changed my life. I was telling you, I started my business, my blog in 2012, and Kickstarter is sort of what got me interested in funding and also interested in all these different creative projects and entrepreneurs, and a lot of cool technology has come out of the platform. So yeah, I'm psyched to talk with you. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat more as well. I feel like we had a great conversation, so looking forward to continuing it.
Do you think we could start by maybe talking a little bit about when you joined Kickstarter? I think it was 2012, 2013. Could you tell us a little bit about that and sort of your role there at the company?
Sure. Yeah, so I've been in the game, I guess, as long as you. I joined Kickstarter in 2012. At the time, the company was pretty small. We were about 40 people total when I joined. We were working out of a tenement building on the Lower East Side down on Rivington, across the street from a matzah factory. So that was fun. It was at the time we had somewhat less defined roles, I think. So I was joining in a support capacity where I was working with backers who needed help, creators that needed help. And as the company grew and roles became more defined, I really focused on campaign strategy. So a lot of my background here at the company has been working directly with creators to prepare and build and launch their campaigns and make sure that they have a successful experience while doing so.
And how big is the team grown now?
Right now, we're about 120 people, which I think people are sometimes surprised that we're kind of as small as we are, considering the footprint of the work that we do.
Yeah, I mean, you guys literally billions of dollars. You've had major projects come out, like literally revolutionary technology. So I think you're very leveraged. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. We have, so out of those 120 people, about 100 of us are here in Brooklyn. And then there's about maybe 24 folks actually spread all over. We have a couple folks in Europe. We have a couple West Coast folks. And then we do have a small satellite office in Vancouver as well.
What's it been like for you as the company has been growing here? I mean, you started at 30 employees. You're all sort of wearing different hats. It's also at that stage, you don't know necessarily if the company is going to be successful long term. I'm sure you get it's like the early days. I think you always sort of look over, and it's sort of like the golden years in a certain sense. But it's also you think back and like, wow, I can't believe we used to do it that way. So, what was it like to grow with the company in that way?
Yeah, I mean, it was super exciting. So the Kickstarter launched in 2009, and I actually joined as a user in January of 2010. I discovered this thing. I actually had a really good friend running a kind of queer photography project, and I was like, oh, this is incredible. I should help her make this happen. It made intuitive sense to me. This kind of like, if everyone agrees this is a good idea, then the project is funded, backers are charged, and the creator can follow through with the project. So I was really excited by the idea back in 2010. And finally in 2012, I realized that Kickstarter was New York City based. 2012 was kind of a breakout year for Kickstarter in a lot of ways, where I think that was the year we had our first $1 million project. That was the year of the Pebble, among many other projects. And so it was just a really exciting time, and my attention was back on Kickstarter. And so it was a cool time to join. And then we got to see every kind of event that followed. So, for example, then we had Veronica Mars, and then we had Zach Braff. And then in the ensuing years, I was actually in a place where I got to work with teams like Mystery Science Theater 3000, which is just like a childhood favorite of mine. And now it's one of Kickstarter's most funded film. It's the most funded film and television project.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. You're sort of at the beginning point of a lot of these projects, just getting started, assembling it. I'm sure you got lots of questions about why is this thing actually working? Like, to me, it's a no-brainer now that crowdfunding makes sense. If you have a bunch of people that are interested in supporting something, it makes sense. But back then, it was kind of like one of those weird topics that no one really knew what it was. You mentioned it at a party and they're like, what's Kickstarter? Like, what's crowdfunding?
Yeah,
and now it's so much more mainstream.
Trying to explain that to your parents when you're leaving a very stable job to join a startup in 2012, that was a challenge, explaining what crowdfunding was. But yeah, I feel like now it's really taken hold. I think even at the time we discussed it, we had kind of these incredible kind of soul-searching conversations in the kitchen at the old office where we would say, like, well, we know crowdfunding is not like commerce, right? It's not going to Amazon.com. It's a very different experience than that because you actually have a relationship with the creator. It's a much more intimate experience, but it's also not strict donation. It's not. It's the next level patronage where you do have a relationship, and so we kind of put our finger on whatever this third thing was. And we still feel like it's this third thing that doesn't slot easily into a kind of pre-existing concept of the way money changes hands in the world.
Yeah, it's very different too. I think the way that you approach it as compared to, like, just say Indiegogo or some of the other platforms out there. Kickstarter, I think, has a really unique angle, also being a public benefit corporation. So those values really also stuck with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the way that we just always worked. I think we had been a certified B Corp about as long as we had been around. But in 2013 or 14, we began the conversation about what about just totally reincorporating the company as a PBC, as like a proper, so that legally, rather than just being a company that, like any other company that has to maximize profits, we would get to balance that against the kind of social interest that we already have. Like, our mission really is to help bring creative projects to life. Broadly, that is what we do. And we do that in a ton of ways across a ton of categories. But we need to be able to balance our mission to make sure that we're able to support the smaller projects as much as the bigger projects, right? We
totally
are
yeah.
really interested in making sure that the tiny stuff has just as much a chance as the big stuff.
Yeah, it's that line from Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. Mm-hmm. Because you now do have this massive clout. You have people who are launching with very big agencies and a big budget to spend. And you have to also make sure that the little guy who is creating something really cool or very creative, that they also have the ability to get the word out there and to also, get a crowd around their campaign.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly it, yeah.
So I'd love to ask you here, you have a very long history. I'm sure there are tons of different success stories that you could name, but in terms of, I guess, one that really resonates with you, one that really speaks to your heart, or one that you look back as a fond memory, could you share with us one project you helped in some way, or one that you've seen sort of evolve over time that's done, either great on Kickstarter or one that just aligns with your values?
Oh gosh, that's hard. It's hard to pick just one. I think one of my favorite anecdotes, and I just mentioned Mystery Science Theater, but this was incredible because we got involved so very early in the process. This was the creator of this television show that ran for a decade in the 90s. That was a kind of a cult classic, but never really had any mainstream appeal. Who came into our office and just said, listen, this is the kind of thing, I know that what I'm trying to do is quixotic. I need over $2 million to make this happen, but I would love to bring this back. And so we worked closely with them, and now being very far on the other side of this and seeing that fan support and this campaign kind of swell to about $6 million raised on the platform. And now I'm sitting on my couch at home, flipping through Netflix, and I'm seeing these episodes. These things happened as a result of what began in one of our conference rooms like 4 years ago.
That's surreal. That's definitely a surreal feeling.
It really is.
Totally, man. Well, I want to get into, some of the lessons also that you've learned, because I think that as Kickstarter has matured and grown along with crowdfunding, we really begin to get to some of these different strategies that you can use to actually launch an effective campaign. I don't know if, from the very beginning, you guys had a very clear idea of what was actually causing people to fund these projects and get traffic and everything. But I think it's pretty clear that over time, you've sort of distilled this into actionable steps that you can take to be more successful with crowdfunding. Would you say?
Yeah. I think we've, at least on our side, we've begun. We have 9 years of data now. We've just celebrated our 9th birthday, and based on that, we've definitely seen certain things that work for certain types of creators, and then of course there are the general every creator rules as well. Like here is just general best practices. And I don't think that they're all necessarily obvious things either. Sometimes you have to remind folks.
So could you share maybe like 1 or 2 tips for the basics, and then we can get a little bit more nitty gritty, like creative types versus more technology entrepreneurship? Would love if we could start. Maybe you could share 1 or 2 bits of advice for just the beginning creator out there.
Sure. Well, I mean, probably a great place to start is the question that I get all the time, which is the number one question. I could be at a party and mention I work at Kickstarter, and this comes up, and it's, hey, how do I get featured on Kickstarter? Like, how do I get the projects we love badge or into a newsletter or something like that? And it's really like deceptively simple. And so at one point I
deceptively simple. I like that.
Yeah. It is kind of a 3-point thing, and I'll break down each of these 3 points a little bit, but it is, we like good ideas from good creators, well presented. And so essentially those 3 parts, the good idea simply means that you're starting from a place where what you're creating is new or original or clever, something different. So we don't have a real strong opinion or an objective opinion on what a good idea means. We just think it needs to be something different, right? That has appeal. The good creators part of that means that the person running the project needs to be communicative. They need to be present. They need to be engaged with their backers. And so this means posting updates and like chatting in the comments and things like that. And then well presented, honestly, may be the most important part of this, which just means you need really nice images and videos and even animated GIFs, whatever you can do to make sure that you're communicating in more than words. This is the internet, right? And so it's the attention economy, and whatever you can do to kind of communicate your idea to your backers in a visual way.
And now, should they be actively trying to reach out to staff members? Should they be trying to reach out on Twitter or different social media to try to get your attention? Or is this something that you sort of select on your own based on the projects that are launching?
Yeah, so actually none of that is necessary, because we do have an in-house team, an editorial team that literally spends all day combing through projects, building these newsletters, tapping projects as projects we love. And then there's also the team that I work with, which is the outreach team. And we're also kind of focused on specific categories, combing through these categories on a daily basis. So the best thing, the best use of a creator's time is really focusing in on their campaign page and making sure that ideally they're launching with all of these boxes checked off. But if not, that they're doing everything they can while the project is live to continue to improve and build it out.
Good. Well said. I think it's one of those things where it's like, obviously you're not going to highlight a project that also isn't a good fit for you, your values, your community. You can't really like trick the system, if you will. It's more of you have to work and actually create a product or create an offering, create a page that actually looks good, that people naturally want to support. And in that way, you're sort of helping also, you're sort of giving them a little bit of a boost in that way.
Yeah. One of my favorite Kickstarter creators, Max Temkin, the creator of Cards Against Humanity. He's a great guy, really smart, and he often kind of he takes a kind of cantankerous approach to people that are like, here's one simple way to get your Kickstarter funded, or the kind of like life hacks approach to it. He often espouses that the only true way is to make sure you're building something that you actually want, that you really believe that other people actually want. Whatever it is you're creating, you just have to know that there is a community out there, or believe that there's a community out there that is as excited about that thing as you are. And with the backers aren't they're not stupid. They're not someone that you can trick. They're looking for authenticity. They're looking for you to be a kind of a credible source, and they're looking for passion. And so really, if it's something that you believe in and that you've invested time and energy in, then it should have an audience out there that you can connect with.
Yeah, if anything, marketing and the sales component is sort of the icing on the cake. You first have to have that fundamental component for it to all to work. What about another tip or another common question you get, at parties, or when you mention you work for Kickstarter, or things that you see people struggling with?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think on that note, I often get the question about ads, right? About digital marketing. Folks are like, is this something that I should do? And that's a really loaded question as well, because it is something that could work for certain creators. I think you need to step back a few paces and really ask if you're at the point where you're going to be spending funds on kind of deriving traffic to the project. What's the goal? Like, did you already exhaust your existing community? Did you have a newsletter when you launched? The questions are always, folks are always just gussying up this essential question of like, how can I be successful?
Yeah.
And so what I tell folks is that you really need to back up and understand your motivation for running the project. So obviously, everybody wants their project to be successful. Everybody wants to collect the funds on the other side of it. But understanding what kind of project you're running is going to inform the way that you prepare for it and then ultimately promote that project.
When you say the type of project, are you talking about like the category, or are you talking about, I guess, you're trying to, make money at this versus you're trying to, spread your word or spread your message or spread your voice in the world? Like, what are you referring to there?
Yeah, that's kind of it. I've been thinking about this topic a lot recently, and the way that I've kind of been categorizing projects for creators is that either a project is financially essential and you absolutely need to collect the funds to move forward, or it's a spiritually essential project and it's something that you really want to do. But if it doesn't happen, if you don't collect the funds, it's not your livelihood, right? Your livelihood doesn't depend on the success of that campaign. So to date, I've run 3 Kickstarter campaigns. All 3 have been successful, but all 3 of them are kind of what I would consider spiritually essential. They were kind of art projects, right? In one case, I created a sound effects CD, and it was a $1,000 raise. So it was successful, but the stakes were also much lower because, I've got a full-time job on the side. There's whole genres of folks like comic artists, games creators, ceramicists. These are folks who their livelihood, they actually use Kickstarter kind of as their livelihood. That's where they engage with their audience, running repeat projects. And so I think every creator that is approaching the idea of launching a Kickstarter campaign kind of needs to understand that motivation. And they need to, if it is the kind of financially essential thing, it just means that there's going to be a lot more work involved in that, because the campaign should be slotting into a kind of either your greater brand strategy or some work that you're already doing.
Well said. I had to interrupt this podcast episode because I want to introduce you to my friends at The Gadget Flow. Their product discovery platform reaches 22 million people per month. They've helped more than 5,000 crowdfunding campaigns thus far, and they have a social media following of more than 700,000 followers. If you want to gain access to their marketplace and list your own product, you can go to thegadgetflow.com/submit and list your project today.
I also think when you're talking about the spiritual component, it very much ties into creativity and art, because you're obviously not making art just for monetary reasons. It's kind of like the antithesis of art.
Yeah.
You're trying to actually put a message and affect change and create emotions in people. And the art, it's in and of itself, like just experiencing it, it doesn't have utility in the same way that a product does. So I think that's a good distinction there. But I would ask you, so for these campaigns that are launching, just say like in the film category, you're launching a theater project, you're launching a publishing campaign, would you recommend in any case that they would use advertising? Or personally, I haven't found that to be very effective, but I'd love to hear what you say.
Yeah, no, I think the majority of the creators that pursue advertising are probably in like the product design or technology spaces, occasionally the game spaces. For creators in other categories, I always like to say that it shouldn't be required. But if you want to earmark, say, $50 to experiment with that kind of thing, calculate your risk and see if you can create any kind of return on that. Generally, though, like advertising works when there's a kind of clear value proposition. And so what I've told folks in the film category that I've worked with that have been like dead set on running ads, I need to tell them that, like, listen, the ad for the broader project for help bring this film to life, that's not going to work the same way as, for example, promoting this incredibly cool reward that you are launching. So if you want to run an ad, actually run it for a given reward, and then the landing page is the Kickstarter page.
Okay, I see what you're saying. When we're thinking about launching a campaign on Kickstarter, I think one of the common questions that I get is, how do you actually rank better in their algorithm? Like, how do you get more seen on the platform? And usually what I say is, you have to have a great project, you have to drive traffic, you have to make sure people are pledging, etc. Is there anything to be said for, ranking well because of their funding they're really fast, like you're getting lots of funding fast? Or do you have any answer to this question of how do we rank better on Kickstarter?
Yeah, so the kind of default algorithm on Kickstarter is something called magic, right? And so I was fortunate to be in the room as folks were kind of coming up with that. And there's a lot of things that are taken into account there. Both the kind of like internal classification score. So we have an auto approval process, for example. And this is a robot that looks at your campaign and says, okay, it looks like you're ready to launch. Or if it sees, any words in there that might be against the rules that we've outlined on our site, then it gets kicked over to a human review. So that informs the algorithm, things like pledge velocity, things like page views. There's a lot going into that. And honestly, it's somewhat hard to game. So I usually tell folks it's not worth their time and energy, especially because it's what you're doing is you're trying to raise yourself up in organic discovery, and organic discovery is always going to be the kind of the most marginal part of your backer pie. And so really it's like an outsized effort for low return. The time would be a lot better spent on activating folks that you've already aggregated through a newsletter, through your own social channels, and then allow the Kickstarter community to do its work, which it's going to do one way or the other. Generally, creators bring about 60 to 70% of their own backers, and the Kickstarter community generally fills out the rest. This is for successful campaigns.
So when we're talking about that community, I think that we all have this vision that like you can just throw up a project and it will magically get funded. You'll have these people who are always supporting campaigns and they'll just discover you in some way. But I also know from having talked with lots and lots of creators, there is a strong community on Kickstarter of people who are regularly backing projects. You call them super backers, you call them frequent backers. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, why is it that these people do you believe, have been supporting projects for years? Like, does it function like Amazon? Like people are just wanting to own different products? What do you think the motivation is there?
Yeah, I think there's a number of motivations because like the most obvious is this kind of like early adopter mentality. One of my favorite things about working here, one of my favorite things about Kickstarter broadly is that what you see on Kickstarter is like stuff that will be in the world a year, 2 years from now. And so like looking at Kickstarter is like looking into the future by a year or two. It's pretty cool in that way. So the early adopter community is very strong, and those are definitely folks that become super backers because they're just excited about being the first to have cool stuff, quite frankly. But I think the most exciting part of our work on super backers and like unpacking this community and looking into this community is that those folks are just a part of the super backer community. And we see folks that support film projects and dance projects and theater projects. And that's super thrilling to us. And when we looked at the data, we could see that, these creators are offering rewards that are either experiential, you get to come and participate, or they're offering rewards that involve credit. There are folks that love just having their names in the credits of films or a flyer for a show. So I think there's a lot of different motivations. One of my good friends and a colleague here, he has backed, gosh, I don't want to underquote him, but thousands of projects. And his name is just everywhere. It's really incredible. There's where is it? Somewhere in South America, there is a rooster that we've named after him as a company. Just because
a rooster.
We helped a small farm out, and for our pledge, we were able to name their rooster. And so we named it after this guy. And
that is awesome, man. That's great. I have one or two more questions for you here, but before we get into that, I did want to ask you, since you've been here a while, you've obviously grown with the company, and I'm sure you've learned so many different things. You've learned key skills. How would you say that you've grown in your career? Since starting way back in 2012, you have 30 people at the company. Now it's grown to more than 100. How would you say that you have personally grown from your time at Kickstarter?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I'm way more confident in a number of ways, but also so humbled. I think that the number one thing I think on a daily basis is that I respect and admire the people that turn to Kickstarter to run campaigns to like make these hugely ambitious projects happen so much. Back in 2012, I probably would have thought I could have run a $10,000 or $20,000 campaign. But now I'm not so sure because I'm working so closely with all of these folks that are doing it. And I just see the work that they're putting into it. And it's hard. There's a lot of time and a lot of energy. And really, it's just such a humbling experience.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where it's like you've gone through the fire, you've gone through and you've launched a project. Like, man, just kudos. Like, I give you so much respect. Yeah. Like, you just look at someone else who's run a project and like you nod and you're like, yeah, we know what went into that. It's a lot of work.
And the repeat creators, the folks who come back for round 2 or round 3 or 4, I think honestly, they're like, I respect them the most, but also an incredible thing is to watch the way that the second time is a little bit easier and the third time is a little bit easier because what they've done, you do 80% of the learning on that first project. And so the first project's incredibly hard, but in the event that you're successful, you take everything that you learned, everything that that foundational community that you've built, and you can run a second campaign, which is still challenging, but a lot more you're a lot more prepared for it.
Totally. You know the road ahead to a certain degree. And on that route, you're going back to Kickstarter. You see these companies that are launching project after project, 1 or 2 a year. It looks like you guys have also developed this other functionality, which is called Drip. So I want to ask you about this because this is a little bit different type of funding than you might think of a traditional crowdfunding campaign. I think actually a lot of people might know what Drip is. So could you share a little bit about the benefits of that, how that's been going for you guys?
Yeah, totally. And so this was a conversation we started having years ago. But the idea that the way that Kickstarter works, which is very focused project-based funding, is not the way every creator works. So our mission broadly as a company is to help bring creative projects to life, but there are projects that aren't being served by this very specific crowdfunding, all or nothing threshold-based mechanism in the Kickstarter ecosystem. So we've always wanted to expand beyond that. And so last year, we announced that we were in a kind of private beta for something called Drip. And so in the way that Kickstarter is for funding projects, Drip is for funding creators. Essentially, it takes that the initial vision of Kickstarter, which is like building a more intimate, a longer term relationship with a creator, and it systematizes it so that now you're able to subscribe to a creator that you love and just maintain this relationship, and they're able to bring you into their process in a way that's not time bound with Kickstarter.
I'm speaking to the crowdfunders in the audience who have already launched a Kickstarter campaign, or have actually even successfully run a campaign. And the reason is, I think you will understand this pain point most. And that is, when you finally do raise money on Kickstarter or Indiegogo, the hardest part is not collecting the cash. The hardest part is shipping out all of those perks and rewards to your backers. It is a nightmare, my friends. It's a lot of spreadsheets, it's a lot of headache, and it's a lot of stress. That's why I recommend BackerKit. If you have not heard of BackerKit, they help you collect surveys, they help you collect data, and the entire fulfillment process is just so much easier and so many less spreadsheets when you use their software. You can check them out at backerkit.com and use CrowdCrux for a special discount.
How is Drip different than a site like Patreon? Patreon is used by YouTubers, podcasters, etc., subscription crowdfunding. How is Drip, would you say, different than Patreon?
Sure. So definitely, I think serialized content will have a really great home at Drip. I think we're different in a few ways. One of those is that the ultimate vision for Drip is that we want to build out something called backer portability. And so rather than locking creators into an ecosystem, we want to make sure that creators are holding us accountable and that the product that we're offering in Drip stays really great and really rich. And the way we're going to do that is by essentially saying you can take your backers and export them, meaning all the existing payments, you don't start fresh if you want to, say, go over somewhere to Patreon. So it's pretty early in the process, but backer portability is part of the vision for Drip. I think another fundamental thing is that while there may be some kind of product overlap, the ideologies behind these two companies, it's somewhat different. We're independently held, right? We're a public benefit corporation. We're independently held. We don't we didn't take like a massive VC funding like a place like Patreon, where if all of a sudden their VCs start saying, hey, you need to increase profitability, the creators are kind of on the line there. And so we want to make sure that this is a place that folks can kind of do their work and thrive and really have full ownership over their community, over their content, and that we're just just making sure that we're supporting the vision for this thing.
Yeah, I definitely see that because Patreon, they also had some issues recently where they were changing the fee structure, I think, a little bit, and their creators had outrage. Yeah. So there are different values there, definitely. So yeah, I think drip is also something where I'm interested in seeing the projects that sort of go over to that and the types of projects, because I can definitely see if you don't have the clout or you're not making a massive project or a product, you don't necessarily need to do a crowdfunding campaign. If you're a creator like myself, like a podcaster or doing YouTube or people that are putting stuff out regularly, I could definitely see drip being a really good solution for that.
Yeah, and one of the most exciting features that we just rolled out, weeks ago, was something that we all lobbied for internally. The employees here were like, listen, this is something that we think is really important, and it's called a $0 tier. And the idea is it's almost, it's like a free follow. And creators can ultimately choose if they want a $0 tier on their drip page, and what they want to publish to the $0 tier. But by virtue of the fact that this exists, it means folks really could use a drip page just to aggregate their entire community. And then a year from now, 2 years from now, down the line, they could decide, you know what, I do want to add tiers where I can monetize like the work.
Interesting. I like that, because it also, you're not locked in that way. Like you can obviously export all of your data and stuff like that. So it's not like you guys are just kind of offering this functionality and be like, hey, can we help you? In any way. So yeah, I love that. That's a really interesting idea. And also then you don't need a website or something like that to house your content.
Yeah. We want to be, we ultimately want this to be an incredible distribution platform, because we believe that that's essential to the success of independent creators.
So I think one of your really big strengths as a company is your dedication to these set of values and also transparency. But at the same time, when you sort of have these more, I would just say like spiritual or beneficial qualities to a company, you also then have to wrestle with some of these other players in the industry who are more financially motivated. So what are your my final question for here, what are your thoughts on some of the services that have surrounded Kickstarter, that have sort of sprung up? I have people that are launched and they're getting bombarded by different services to help market their project to backers, et cetera. What are your thoughts on some of these services that have cropped up?
Yeah. We operate from a place where we assume positive intent. Like we like to believe that everyone that is out there is like really doing good work on behalf of creators. Ultimately, we understand the burden of running a Kickstarter project, and so can totally see how this kind of cottage industry of external campaign strategists and marketing services, and how all of these have popped up as a result of how difficult a campaign is to run. We operate in the best interest of creators, and we hope that other folks do, but we also caution creators that these folks won't necessarily always. At the end of the day, it really is a thing where we would advise folks to do their research. Ideally, you're working only with people that you have kind of either some kind of relationship with, or maybe have been word of mouth referrals, and you've heard of friends that have had really good experiences with those folks. Whenever possible, I think we love to see folks doing all of the work in-house, because what you learn from doing it and also what you build from doing it is so valuable. And you can then take that and move forward and apply it to future campaigns. It's also keeping a higher margin for you, the creator. You're in a position where you need money, and all of these services cost money. So I would say, I hate to use the term necessary evil, because I don't think they're evil even, but I think it is kind of a necessary thing, but not necessary for every creator. And we do recommend exercise caution if you're approaching.
Yeah. Totally. I think just doing a little bit of research, being aware of their footprint, even listening to shows like this, you get very clear to hear from some of these people that are running these different companies and such, and their thoughts on it. So I think the more research you do, the more education you consume, it definitely sets you up for better success there. And listening to also other creators talk about these services, I think is a really good way to go about that. Well, Michael, this is, I want to do like another show here where we go like really deep into different things that you have noticed when it comes to Kickstarter, like reward pricing or campaign page layout, like all that kind of stuff. I think we should sort of let this settle and see what kind of questions emerge from the podcast, and then we can maybe address them in another show. But to sort of end this, I'd love it if you could take a second to talk to the creator listening to this show. Someone who's just gearing up, maybe thinking of doing a project, or they're right about to launch one. If you could share a word of encouragement, if you could share a final tip, maybe something they should be aware of, anything like that, would love it if you could end the show on that note.
Sure. Well, first of all, hi there. You've got quite an adventure ahead of you. I think the most important thing, and when you're approaching something like a Kickstarter campaign, is, like I said, first, know thyself. Understand your motivation. You really want to know that so that you can communicate that out to your backers, so that you can strategize for your launch. I think I would always advise that folks take their time and enjoy the process. Enjoy all of the preparations, whatever it is that you're building or that you're creating. Invest in yourself and invest in that work before the campaign is live, because really all a campaign is a stopwatch. When you click that start button, you've started a stopwatch. And so do as much as you can before launch, build your community, prepare yourself, and then enjoy it.
Well said. Well said. Mike, thank you for coming on the podcast. We'll have to have you back. A lot of more content to uncover here. So I appreciate you sharing all those great tips, the advice that you have. We'll have to have you back.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, Sal.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Again, my name is Salvador Briggman. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you got a lot out of it. I think we were really lucky, guys. I think we were super lucky to get Michael on the show today, a staff member from Kickstarter, because you heard it from the horse's mouth. Like, the only thing that you can do, aside from maybe playing more into the values of Kickstarter, really getting your good branding and marketing and doing good communications, is you really need a good product. You need a good project. You need to present it well. And you also have to have the right values going into the project. And that's really how you can do things like ranking better on Kickstarter or getting into the newsletter, etc. I also would add my own thoughts to that, to having an effective launch strategy. Like, that's the entire goal with this show, is to deliver those tips and advice for you. But I think it's great to also hear it first person from Kickstarter as to what you can do. I also just loved hearing some of Michael's war stories. Some of the stories when he joined the company very early stage at 30 employees, then it started to grow more and more. Hearing one or two of the projects that he worked on just is incredibly fascinating. I think we're witnessing a cultural trend, a difference in the way that products come to light and innovations come to light. And I think we're living, honestly, in the golden age of fundraising. Never before has it been easier to raise money online, to connect with people, to connect with tribes of people, to get the word out there, to get your message out there. I think we live in really unique times. So, guys, this is my passion. If you want to continue to listen to episodes and get notifications of new ones that I have coming out, take a second to hit that subscribe button on the podcast app if you're listening to this on your smartphone. And also, if you want my weekly tips newsletter, my weekly crowdfunding tips, where I basically send out the content I've been writing, the things that I've been discovering, some of my announcements, and also new videos that I have coming out, you can go to crowdcrux.com/subscribe. That is crowdcrux.com/subscribe. Just enter your email address, and then you'll hop onto my weekly newsletter. You can also reply to any of those emails, and I'll do my best to read them and get back to you. Again, my name is Sal. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.